I never thought a simple gate would turn my life into a war zone. When I moved into Oak Ridge Estates, I expected peace, quiet, and a safe place to raise my daughter, Emily. What I got instead was a living nightmare, courtesy of the most power-hungry HOA board imaginable, led by none other than Karen Thompson. It all started after the third break-in in our neighborhood in less than a month. First, the Harris family 2 doors down had their house ransacked while their kids were home alone. Then, the Lopez family woke up to shattered windows and missing valuables. When Mrs. Anderson, an elderly widow, found her back door wide open one morning, I knew I had to take action. I wasn't going to wait for the criminals to pick my house next. That weekend, I had a simple black iron security gate installed, nothing flashy, just enough to create a barrier. I even went through the HOA handbook twice before making the decision. No rules were broken. No guidelines were ignored. Even Emily helped pick it out, excited that our house would finally look like the ones in her friends' neighborhoods. Our delivery driver even thanked me, saying he felt safer leaving packages behind the gate. For 3 days, everything was fine. Then, Karen Thompson showed up. I saw her through the kitchen window, power walking up my driveway, her neon pink tennis outfit blinding in the morning sun, that giant sparkly water bottle in hand, her signature accessory for her so-called fitness walks, which were really just gossip sessions with the other HOA board members. Before I could even say hello, she planted herself on my doorstep, hands on her hips, and announced her verdict like a self-appointed judge. That gate has to go. It makes the neighborhood look like a prison. I barely had time to react before she started tapping her expensive running shoe against my welcome mat, her expression smug, waiting for me to comply. I tried reasoning with her, explaining the break-ins, even pulling up police reports to show I wasn't just being paranoid. She cut me off mid-sentence, waving a dismissive hand. I'm on the HOA board now, and this simply won't do. Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. That night, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my new gate. The next morning, I saw Karen outside taking photos of my house at sunrise. And just like that, the battle had begun. By the end of the week, my $100 a day violation fines were stacking up, and I hadn't even had time to process how fast everything was spiraling. It wasn't just the fines, Karen was everywhere. Every morning, she was outside, snapping dozens of photos of my house like a detective gathering evidence. By afternoon, she'd be on her front porch, phone glued to her ear, watching my every move like some kind of suburban overlord. And every evening, I'd come home to yet another notice taped to my gate, each one more ridiculous than the last. First, it was, unauthorized structures. Then, altering neighborhood aesthetic. The best one? Excessive security measures, instilling fear in the community. The woman who organized Crime Watch meetings was now punishing me for trying to keep my home safe. Emily started taking the long way home from school. One night, she stood in the kitchen, barely meeting my eyes as she whispered, "Dad. Karen's daughter told everyone our house is bringing down property values. That's why I wasn't invited to Tommy's birthday party." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This isn't about a gate anymore, is it?" she asked. I had no answer, but I knew she was right. Things got worse fast. The next morning, I woke up to fresh graffiti on my driveway, big, bold red letters spelling, "criminal," across the pavement. I checked the security footage and felt my jaw clench. Karen's son, Ethan, and his little pack of followers had done it, laughing the whole time. I sent the footage straight to the HOA board. Their response? A violation notice. For me. Homeowner responsible for maintaining clean driveway. Immediate remediation required. I stormed over to Rick Lawson's house, but the HOA president conveniently wasn't home. Instead, I got an email later that afternoon. "We encourage all residents to maintain the high standards of Oak Ridge Estates." Any further disputes will be considered harassment. I had barely processed that when there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found 2 CPS investigators standing on my porch. We received a report about potential child neglect in the Mitchell home, one of them said, professional but firm. For the first time since this all started, I actually felt my stomach drop. I let them inside, keeping my composure while they checked the house, asked Emily a few questions, and reviewed our living situation. By the end, they assured me there was no issue, just a routine follow-up. Routine my ass. Karen had called Child Protective Services on me. I clenched my fists, watching them drive away. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. Karen wanted me out, and she was willing to destroy my life to make it happen. I needed leverage. That night, I dug into HOA financial records, looking for anything that could explain why Karen was so determined to control this neighborhood. What I found made my head spin. A percentage of every single fine issued by the HOA was funneled into a beautification fund, one that Karen and Rick controlled exclusively. And where did the money go? Personal purchases. Wine subscriptions, spa treatments, home renovations. My fines, every unfair dollar, were paying for Karen's luxury lifestyle. I closed my laptop, staring at the screen. I wasn't just fighting an HOA dictator. I was fighting a crook. And she had no idea what was coming. The sound of metal scraping against pavement jolted me awake before dawn. At first, in my half-asleep state, I thought it was just a garbage truck making its rounds too early. But then Emily's panicked voice cut through the morning stillness. "Dad! There are bulldozers outside." I threw on my robe and ran downstairs, my pulse hammering against my skull. The moment I yanked open the front door, a flood of yellow warning lights nearly blinded me. Parked right on my lawn were 3 massive construction vehicles, engines growling like beasts waiting to pounce. And standing front and center, looking infuriatingly smug in her perfect tennis outfit, was Karen. Phone in one hand, coffee in the other, she recorded everything like she was filming a reality show. "You need to stop this right now," I shouted over the noise. Rick Lawson, looking just as self-satisfied, stepped forward, waving a thick stack of papers. He practically thrust them in my face, his gold HOA president pin gleaming in the dawn light. "Don't bother calling the cops, David. Judge Harrison signed off on this injunction yesterday. Your security gate is a direct violation of HOA emergency aesthetic codes. It's coming down, whether you like it or not." I snatched the papers from his hand, my stomach twisting as I scanned them. The signature was real. They had actually gone to court behind my back and gotten an emergency demolition order. I was legally blindsided. Karen sipped her coffee dramatically, smiling. "Maybe next time you'll learn to follow the rules," she purred. My hands shook with fury, but years of politics had taught me to pick my battles. So instead of fighting, I did the one thing they didn't expect. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Rick," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady, too calm, the kind of calm that makes people nervous. "This injunction only mentions my gate. Why are your workers setting up equipment near my front wall?" Rick hesitated, but Karen didn't. "Oh, the wall has to go too. It's all part of the same ugly security structure," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You can't just build a fortress in our beautiful neighborhood." My blood ran cold. The demolition wasn't just about the gate anymore. They were tearing down parts of my actual home. I could see Emily standing behind me, still in her pajamas, tears streaking down her face. She wasn't scared anymore. She was furious. Justice. Karen turned to the small crowd of onlookers, neighbors in bathrobes and slippers who had gathered at the end of my driveway. This is what happens when people refuse to respect community standards. The demolition crew chief approached with yet another document, looking uncomfortable. "Sir, I need you to step back. We're authorized to begin work, and if you interfere, we'll have to call the authorities." I glanced at the logo on his jacket. Lawson Construction. Rick's own company had gotten the contract. Karen beamed at the crowd as the workers got to tearing my property apart. The gate went first. The metal screeched as they ripped it from the hinges like it was nothing. I could almost hear Karen's satisfaction dripping from every breath she took. Then, they moved to the front wall. I watched in silent rage as brick and mortar crumbled onto my garden beds. Emily let out a choked gasp as her late mother's roses were crushed under falling debris. My fingers clenched so tightly around my phone that my knuckles turned white. But I kept recording. Because what Karen and Rick didn't know, what no one realized yet, was that this entire operation was illegal. They had made 3 massive mistakes. 1. They failed to notify me of the court hearing. 2. The demolition was crossing property lines, destroying parts of my home that weren't in violation. 3. The HOA board had given the contract to Rick's own company, clear financial corruption. I tapped a quick message to my assistant, Tom Bradley, at the state capitol. Confirm Judge Harrison's ruling. Also, get me a full list of HOA violations from Oak Ridge Estates, stat. Rick must have noticed something shift in my expression because he suddenly looked nervous. "Wrap it up quickly," he barked at the crew. He knew. He knew something was wrong. But it was already too late. I turned to face the growing crowd of neighbors, lifting my phone higher. "I want everyone here to witness this," I said, my voice perfectly measured. "Notice the time. Notice who's present. Notice exactly what's being destroyed." For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Karen's smirk faltered. The sun finally crept over the horizon, shining light on the absolute destruction in front of me. $23,000 worth of property, gone. But they had no idea what was coming next. Because tomorrow wasn't just another HOA board meeting. It was also the day I'd be announcing my new position as chair of the State Housing Committee. And Karen and Rick had just bulldozed their way into the biggest mistake of their lives. The smell of crushed brick and torn earth still lingered in the air when I walked into the state capitol the next morning. I had barely slept. Instead, I spent the night documenting everything, replaying footage from my security cameras, and compiling every fine, every violation, every corrupt transaction Karen and Rick had ever issued. And now, as I stepped through the marble halls toward the Housing Committee hearing, my phone buzzed with new messages. 3 different news stations had picked up the story. Photos of my demolished gate and destroyed garden were already making rounds on social media. But that wasn't what stopped me in my tracks. It was Karen and Rick sitting in the waiting area, right outside the committee room. Karen had traded her usual pastel tennis outfits for a stiff blazer, but the arrogance on her face was the same. She sat with perfect posture, her nails tapping impatiently against her oversized purse. Rick, on the other hand, looked noticeably less confident, tugging at his collar as their lawyer whispered furiously in his ear. They hadn't expected to be here today. And they certainly hadn't expected to see me walk past them, straight toward the chairman's desk. Rick's face went pale. Karen's lips parted slightly. Recognition hit them like a freight train. The woman they had been harassing, fining, and humiliating for months was not just another homeowner. I was the one about to lead the investigation against them. I set my briefcase on the desk, adjusted my microphone, and called the meeting to order. Today, we will be reviewing the abuse of power by homeowners associations, focusing specifically on Oak Ridge Estates and its recent, questionable enforcement tactics. I let my words hang in the air before gesturing toward the large screen behind me. With a single click, the first image appeared. A screenshot from my security camera, Karen and Rick standing in my driveway at midnight, pointing and measuring. I turned slightly to look at them. Rick was sweating now. Karen had stopped tapping her nails. This is just one of many documented instances of harassment, I continued, flipping to the next image. The financial records. The next slide displayed a series of transactions from the HOA's so-called beautification fund. Karen's spa treatments. Rick's home renovations. A luxury wine subscription. Karen actually flinched. Would either of you like to explain why homeowners' violation fines were used to cover personal expenses? I asked smoothly. Rick's lawyer started to rise from his chair, but I didn't stop. I clicked again. Surveillance footage. On screen, Karen's son, Ethan, was caught red-handed vandalizing my driveway. Then, Greg Thompson, Karen's husband, was seen trespassing in my yard the night my garden was destroyed. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of my colleagues leaned forward, watching intently. This wasn't just a case of overzealous HOA enforcement anymore. This was a criminal operation. Rick finally snapped. He shot up from his chair, voice shaking. This is outrageous. These are all just coincidences. Fabrications. I silenced him with a single nod to my assistant. Another slide. Emails. A thread between Rick and Karen, strategizing how to remove me from the neighborhood. Karen's own handwriting in one of the printed messages. We need to make his life miserable until he sells. If that doesn't work, we'll hit him where it hurts, his reputation. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, Jesus Christ. Karen finally spoke, her voice thin and forced. This is all being taken out of context. I clicked one last time. A satellite image of her backyard. Her illegal pool extension, clearly marked as encroaching on public property. The same woman who had fought tooth and nail to enforce petty violations against her neighbors had built a non-permitted addition to her own house. She was done. The rest of the hearing was a blur of legal jargon, deflections, and desperate attempts at damage control. But it didn't matter. The evidence was bulletproof. By the time the meeting ended, Karen and Rick had lost everything. A full-scale investigation into Oak Ridge Estates was now underway, with state officials looking into financial fraud, selective enforcement, and harassment claims. More than a dozen homeowners had come forward with their own horror stories. Some had been fined for mailbox colors, others for patio furniture choices, while Karen's inner circle had gotten away with blatant violations. By the end of the day, my phone buzzed with a message from my assistant. Senator, the Homeowner Protection Act just passed the preliminary vote. It's moving forward with unanimous support. I leaned back in my chair, finally exhaling. Karen and Rick had tried to destroy my home. Instead, they had built my case. And tomorrow, they were going to learn exactly what happens when you weaponize power against the wrong person. The fallout came faster than even I expected. By the time I arrived home that evening, news vans were already parked along the street, cameras rolling as neighbors came forward with their own horror stories. The state's Ethics Commission had launched a formal investigation, and within 24 hours, both Karen and Rick were removed from the HOA board. But that was just the beginning. Karen's illegal pool extension was flagged for demolition. Rick's unpermitted garage expansion was slapped with an immediate cease and desist order. The same HOA that had tormented homeowners with petty fines and selective enforcement was now facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties. And Karen, who had spent years weaponizing the rulebook against everyone else, was now drowning in violations of her own. The real humiliation came when Karen's home went up for sale. With the HOA under legal scrutiny and the neighborhood's reputation tarnished beyond repair, property values actually dropped, the exact thing Karen had been obsessed with protecting. Her once pristine image shattered, she packed up in a hurry, avoiding cameras as she loaded her garden gnomes and overpriced patio furniture into a moving truck. For once, she had nothing to say. Rick fared even worse. The state's real estate board revoked his license, and a deeper audit uncovered years of financial misconduct linked to HOA contracts. He wasn't just losing his position, he was facing charges. As I stood on my front porch, watching Karen's SUV pull out of the driveway for the last time, Emily appeared beside me, a quiet smile on her face. "Remember when she told her kids not to play with me because we were troublemakers?" she asked. I nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Now look who's leaving the neighborhood." I turned back toward my house, taking in the sight of my new, perfectly legal security gate. The battle had started over something so small, but in the end, it had exposed something so much bigger. The fight wasn't just about my home, it was about every homeowner who had ever been bullied by unchecked HOA power. And as my phone buzzed with calls from other states, asking how they could pass similar laws, I realized this was far from over. Karen and Rick had lost. But the real victory? That belonged to every homeowner who would never have to face another HOA tyrant like them again. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.